Hey guys, it's Hedgehog. This video, obviously I'm a little bit more dressed up because I'm going to be talking about the Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview. I want to put a little disclaimer out there saying that I do not agree with either Putin or what the Western world countries are doing. I'm simply just making opinions based on the video that is the interview. So, I'll try to maybe cut some clips in so it helps illustrate my point. Till then, let's just get into this. Right. So, from what I saw in the interview, it seems as though Putin is extremely knowledgeable on the topic of Russia, history of Russia, history of Ukraine, and how things have kind of evolved and or devolved to the point that it is now. It also seems as though he's very knowledgeable about Tucker's background, what Tucker went to school for, and all that stuff. It seems to be very knowledgeable. So one of the first things that I'd like to discuss is during the interview, he goes on saying that in 1654 that countries bordering Ukraine like Turkey have rights to Ukraine.
Now I will tell you what happened later and give the dates so that there is no confusion. And in 1654, even a bit earlier, the people who were in control of the authority over that part of the Russian lands addressed Warsaw, I repeat, demanding that they send them to rulers of Russian origin and Orthodox faith. When Warsaw did not answer them, and in fact rejected their demands, they turned to Moscow, so that Moscow took them away. As expected, the war with Poland began. It lasted 13 years, and then in 1654, a truce was concluded. And 32 years later, I think, a peace treaty with Poland, which they called Eternal Peace, was signed. And these lands, the whole left bank of Dnieper, including Kiev, went to Russia. And the whole right bank of the partitioning of Czechoslovakia.
But may I ask you, you're making the case that Ukraine, certainly parts of Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, is in effect Russia, has been for hundreds of years. Why wouldn't you just take it when you became president 24 years ago? You have nuclear weapons, they don't. If it's actually your land, why did you wait so long?
I'll tell you. I'm coming to that. This briefing is coming to an end. It might be boring, but it explains many things.
You just don't know how it's relevant.
One may say that they could claim back those lands of theirs while having no right to do that. It is at least understandable.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Never. I have never told him, not a single time. We have not even had any conversation on that, but I actually know for sure that Hungarians who live there wanted to get back to their historical land.
And seeing as after World War II, that's when Ukraine kind of became Ukraine, that maybe Turkey has rights to parts of Ukraine. I think that obviously, I don't think Turkey or Russia should invade Ukraine. I think having negotiations is a little bit more open and a little bit more beneficial for the future. There you go. I think Tucker asked him, did he feel a threat from the West? Is that why he started the war? And that
Well, that is, and there's a lot of that, though. I think many nations are upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made, which I read today, you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat, and that's what got you to move. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian leadership. I do not understand what the Russian leadership was guided by at the time, but I suspect there were several reasons to think everything would be fine. First, I think that then Russian leadership believed that the fundamentals of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine were, in fact, a common language. More than 90% of the population there spoke Russian. Family ties. Every third person there had some kind of family or friendship ties. Common culture, common history. Finally, common faith, coexistence with a single state for centuries, and deeply interconnected economies. All of these were so fundamental. All these elements together make our good relationships inevitable. The second point is a very important one. I want you, as an American citizen, and your viewers to hear about this as well. The former Russian leadership assumed that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and therefore there were no longer any ideological dividing lines. Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and believed that this would be understood by the so-called civilized West as an invitation for cooperation and association.
Putin's response saying that Russia itself agreed to sort of collapse the USSR, and then that they didn't want NATO expanding into Russia was the caveat for, okay, if you expand, we'll start attacking. And this goes into another point stating that, like, that Russia had asked NATO and the Western world, don't expand, and they said, yes, we won't expand, and then they proceeded to do it 5 times.
And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are market economy and there is no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Why would they have to do that? All this could have been done legally, without victims, without military action, without losing Crimea. We would have never considered to even lift a finger if it hadn't been for the bloody developments on Maidan. Because we agreed with the fact that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, our borders should be along the borders of former Union's republics. We agreed to that, but we never agreed to NATO's expansion, and moreover, we never agreed that Ukraine would be in NATO. We did not agree to NATO bases there without any discussion with us. For decades, we kept asking, don't do this, don't do that.
So, from what he's saying, it seems as though he's being a bit more reasonable in terms of, like, hey, I'm willing to negotiate, just don't expand past this line or this part of the world and we'll be fine. And it's like, yeah, we won't do it, but they inevitably do. So it seems to me as well that from what Tucker and Putin were talking about, saying that it seems as though the West is more scared of a strong Russia instead of being scared of a strong China, where they have expanded past Russia, they've expanded past most countries in the West, and yet they're more scared of Russia, the big mean Kremlin.
Но, тем не менее,
Everything happened just as he had said.
Well, of course, it did come true, and you've mentioned this many times. I think it's a fair point, and many in America thought that relations between Russia and the United States would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, that the opposite happened. But you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia, but we have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of. What about Russia do you think convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Запад боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again. Through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China. It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself. It is a delicate matter, and there are no silver bullet solutions, just as it is with the dollar. So, before introducing any illegitimate sanctions, illegitimate in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, one should think very carefully. For decision makers, this appears to be a problem. Look, China's economy has become the first economy in the world in purchasing power parity. In terms of volume, it overtook the US a long time ago. The USA comes second, then India, 1.5 billion people, and then Japan, with Russia in the fifth place. Russia was the first economy in Europe last year, despite all the sanctions and restrictions. Is it normal from your point of view? Sanctions, restrictions, impossibility of payments in dollars, being cut off from SWIFT services, sanctions against our ships carrying oil, sanctions against airplanes, sanctions in everything, everywhere. The largest number of sanctions in the world which are applied against Russia. And we have become Europe's first economy during this time.
I think it's not necessarily being scared of Russia and or China, it's being scared of any sort of political power that expands well past agreed upon borders or agreed upon parameters. And we've seen this happen a few times. We've seen it happen during World War II with Hitler and the Nazis. Them slowly expanding their power, even though the Treaty of Versailles said they shouldn't. But we're getting into a history lesson, and I'm simply just here saying that I just want to state my thoughts on what I think and where I think we should go from this. So, there's another point where Putin basically was talking to Bill Clinton at the possibility of Russia joining NATO, and then Clinton turned around, first saying, yeah, that's a possibility, but then turned around saying, no, you can't have Russia join NATO.
I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened.
I think that, if that was the truth, again, I'm not sure. The fans, can look it up yourselves. Anybody who disagrees with either me or Putin or Tucker or whoever, if you disagree, you can simply look it up yourself and get the information and proceed to form your own opinion, which is kind of the whole premise of this channel, whether it's YouTube or Rumble. I just want people to watch what I have to say and form their own opinions based on it. I'm stating what I think about whatever topic, and you guys might disagree with me, and that's great. I always encourage that. Disagree in the comments, disagree with me, disagree with other people, but I would like to encourage the civil discourse of let's have two different opinions, but let's try to come to some sort of compromise where both parties walk away happy. Okay, the next point is how Putin went to America and talked to Bush Sr. about a missile defense system with Russia and some of the Western world countries. And how they're like, oh, that's a good idea, but, then they turn around saying, no, we're not interested.
That is what Russia was expecting, both from the United States and the so-called collective West as a whole. There were smart people, including in Germany. Egon Bahr, a major politician of the Social Democratic Party, who insisted in his personal conversations with the Soviet leadership on the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union that a new security system should be established in Europe. Help should be given to unify Germany, but a new system should be also established to include the United States, Canada, Russia, and other Central European countries.
Yes.
But NATO needs not to expand. That's what he said. If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War, only closer to Russia's borders. That's all. He was a wise old man, but no one listened to him. Do you remember what I told you about my proposal to work together on a missile defense system?
Yes.
You can ask all of them. All of them are safe and sound, thank God. The former president, Condoleezza, is safe and sound, and I think Mr. Gates and the current director of the intelligence agency, Mr. Burns, the then ambassador to Russia, in my opinion, are very successful ambassador. They were all witnesses to these conversations. Ask them. Same here. If you are interested in what Mr. President Biden responded to me, ask him. At any rate, I talked to him about it.
Отец Буша
After was invited by Bush Jr.'s father, Bush Sr., to visit his place on the ocean,
Там состоялась очень серьезная беседа,
I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team.
чтобы
I proposed that the United States, Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that, we believe,
которая, как мы считаем,
if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran.
угроз со стороны.
That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system. I suggested working together, Russia, the United States, and Europe. They said it was very interesting. They asked me, "Are you serious?" I said, "Absolutely."
Я говорю, представь,
Let me ask, what year was this?
ну, я не помню, вот
I don't remember.
в интернете, когда я был.
It is easy to find out on the internet when I was in the USA at the invitation of Bush Sr. It is even easier to learn from someone I'm going to tell you about.
Мне сказали, это очень интересно.
I was told it was very interesting. I said, just imagine if we could tackle such a global strategic security challenge together.
Мир изменится.
The world will
Наверное,
change.
будут споры,
We'll
наверное,
probably have disputes, probably economic and even political ones, but we could drastically change the situation in the world.
этот
He
изменится.
says yes,
Конечно.
and asks, "Are you serious?" I said, "Of course. We need to think about it," I'm told.
Вот в этот кабинет.
I said, "Go ahead, please." Then Secretary of Defense Gates, former director of CIA, and Secretary of State Rice came in here, in this cabinet, right here at this table. They sat on this table. Me, the foreign minister, the Russian defense minister on that side.
Министр обороны.
They said to me,
Они мне
"Yes, we have thought about it. We agree." I said, "Thank God, great,
Но
but with some exceptions."
It's very shocking to see. From what I'm seeing in this interview, it seems as though Putin is coming across saying, "Hey, look, I'm willing to negotiate. I'm willing to bend on certain things if you're willing to bend on other things and come to some, as I've stated before about my channel, I'm willing to come to some sort of a compromise." It does surprise me that throughout this video, Putin has said that I'm willing to talk, I'm willing to negotiate, but the Western world and all these other countries who seem to be against him are always on the side of, yes, I want to negotiate with you, but then I actually don't want to negotiate with you. It's one of those, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say Putin's a dictator, and even if he is a dictator, even if Putin is an evil dictator of a man, you can't turn around saying he's a dictator, he's a horrible person, but we're always willing to negotiate. We're always willing to talk to him. If he's willing to talk, but you're not willing to, then how the hell are you going to find any sort of compromise? It seems as though, as well, like, you know, when Tucker kind of prompted him again, stating, what was the sort of thing that set off the whole, I'm going to attack Ukraine? And he stated that it was like the coup d'etat in Ukraine sort of provoked it, but then it was also the Western world countries not implementing the Minsk agreements, and also like that he wants to denazify Ukraine.
What was but that was 8 years before the current conflict started. So what was the trigger for you? What was the moment where you decided you had to do this?
ну, спровоцировал конфликт изначально.
Initially, it was the coup in Ukraine that provoked the conflict.
Кстати говоря,
By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland, and France, arrived. They were the guarantors of the signed agreement between the government of Yanukovych and the opposition. They signed it as guarantors.
Несмотря на это,
Despite that, the opposition committed a coup, and all these countries pretended that they didn't remember that they were guarantors of the peaceful settlement.
никто не вспоминает.
They just threw it in the stove right away, and nobody recalls that. I don't know if the US know anything about the agreement between the opposition and the authorities, and its three guarantors who, instead of bringing this whole situation back in the political field, supported the coup. Although it was meaningless, believe me. Because President Yanukovych agreed to all conditions, he was ready to hold an early election which he had no chance of winning, frankly speaking. Everyone knew that. Then why the coup? Why the victims? Why threatening Crimea? Why launching an operation in Donbass? This I do not understand. That is exactly what the miscalculation is. CIA did its job to complete the coup. I think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost 5 billion. But the political mistake was colossal. And what triggered the latest events? Firstly, the current Ukrainian leadership declared that it would not implement the Minsk agreements, which had been signed, as you know, after the events of 2014 in Minsk, where the plan of peaceful settlement in Donbass was set forth. But no, the current Ukrainian leadership, foreign minister, all other officials, and then president himself said that they don't like anything about the Minsk agreements. In other words, they were not going to implement it. A year or a year and a half ago, former leaders of Germany and France said openly to the whole world that they indeed signed the Minsk agreements, but they never intended to implement them. They simply led us by the nose.
Was there anyone for you to talk to? Did you call a U.S. President, Secretary of State, and say, if you keep militarizing Ukraine with NATO forces, this is going to be we're going to act?
We talked about this all the time. We addressed the United States and European countries' leadership to stop these developments immediately, to implement the Minsk agreements. Frankly speaking, I didn't know how we were going to do this, but I was ready to implement them. These agreements were complicated for Ukraine. They included lots of elements of those Donbass territories' independence. That's true. However, I was absolutely confident, and I'm saying this to you now. I honestly believe that if we managed to convince the residents of Donbass, and we had to work hard to convince them to return to the Ukrainian statehood, then gradually the wounds would start to heal. When this part of territory reintegrated itself into common social environment, when the pensions and social benefits were paid again, all the pieces would gradually fall into place. No, nobody wanted that. Everybody wanted to resolve the issue by military force only. But we could not let that happen. And the situation got to the point when the Ukrainian side announced, no, we will not do anything. They also started preparing for military action. It was they who started the war in 2014. Our goal is to stop this war. And we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Of course.
This question appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky. You say Hitler has been dead for so many years, 80 years. But his example lives on. People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive. And the president, the current president of today's Ukraine, applauds him in the Canadian Parliament, gives a standing ovation. Can we say that we have completely uprooted this ideology if what we see is happening today? That is what denazification is in our understanding. We have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what denazification is. That is what we mean.
Do you think you've stopped it now? I mean, have you achieved your aims?
No, we haven't achieved our aims yet, because one of them is denazification. This means the prohibition of all kinds of neo-Nazi movements. This is one of the problems that we discussed during the negotiation process, which ended in Istanbul early this year.
Который завершился в Стамбуле в прошлом году в начале.
And it was not our initiative, because we were told by the Europeans, in particular, that it was necessary to create conditions for the final signing of the documents. My counterparts in France and Germany said, "How can you imagine them signing a treaty with a gun to their heads? The troops should be pulled back from Kiev." I said, "All right." We withdrew the troops from Kiev. As soon as we pulled back our troops from Kiev, our Ukrainian negotiators immediately threw all our agreements reached in Istanbul into the bin and got prepared for a long-standing armed confrontation with the help of the United States and its satellites in Europe. That is how the situation has developed, and that is how it looks now.
But what is, pardon my ignorance, what is denazification? What would that mean? What is...
Да, вот я как раз хочу сейчас об этом сказать. Это очень важный вопрос. Денацификация.
That is what I want to talk about right now. It is a very important issue. Denazification. After gaining independence, Ukraine began to search, as some Western analysts say, its identity. And it came up with nothing better than to build this identity upon some false heroes who collaborated with Hitler.
So, again, I'm only going based off what I'm seeing in this video. Is it seems to me that he's again, it seems as though he's being a bit more of the rational one, saying, "Hey, I just want this. I would like this. Like, I want to maybe do this. Like, let's get rid of this thing because it doesn't make sense anymore." And going off that denazification thing, where he talks about, that's kind of one of the things he's attacked Ukraine for, is that how he referenced the whole Trudeau inviting a Nazi into the House of Commons, and they all stood up and applauded, which, you know, even as a Canadian, that is kind of an embarrassment. That, as Douglas Murray put it, where it's like, you know, the basic sort of background check should have been done, saying, "Hey, oh, this guy fought the Russians in World War II. Well, who were the people fighting the Russians? Well, that was the Nazis." And the fact that it's now come out that it wasn't Anthony Rota who okayed it, it was Trudeau. And Anthony Rota fell on his sword for Trudeau. It seems as though Trudeau's gotten himself into a lot of scandals that he can't seem to get himself out of. You know, he keeps putting his foot in dog shit, not wondering why his feet smell like shit. And I believe later on in the interview, Putin talks about how he confronted Zelensky, saying that you're a Jew, and your father's a Jew who fought in World War II against the Nazis, so why are you allowing them to fight for you?
How can this be imagined? The president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
Do you think Zelensky has the freedom to negotiate a settlement to this conflict?
I don't know the details. Of course, it's difficult for me to judge. But I believe he has, in any case, he used to have. His father fought against the fascists, Nazis, during World War II. I once talked to him about this. I said, "Volodya, what are you doing? Why are you supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine today, while your father fought against fascism? He was a front-line soldier." I will not tell you what he answered. This is a separate topic, and I think it's incorrect for me to do so. But as to the freedom of choice, why not? He came to power on the expectations of Ukrainian people that he would lead Ukraine to peace. he talked about this. It was thanks to this that he won the elections overwhelmingly. But then, when he came to power, in my opinion, he realized two things. Firstly, it is better not to clash with neo-Nazis and nationalists, because they are aggressive and very active. You can expect anything from them. And secondly, the US-led West supports them and will always support those who antagonize with Russia. It is beneficial and safe. So he took the relevant position despite promising his people to end the war in Ukraine. He deceived his voters.
And how Zelensky never really gave him a straight answer. And the other funny thing that I find about that thing, again, I'm not saying that, it's all Ukraine's fault or Russia's fault. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying from the information in this video, I am going off that. I am not going off personal opinions or personal gripes or, personal biases. I guess that's a word, yeah. How Zelensky signed a decree forbidding any of the other countries from negotiating with Russia.
Moreover, the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. But how are we going to negotiate if he forbade himself and everyone to do this? We know that he is putting forward some ideas about this settlement, but in order to agree on something, we need to have a dialogue. Is that not right?
To me, I guess it's more sort of my inner punk rocker coming out saying, what the fuck? Why are you doing that? Why are you signing a decree saying you don't want everyone else talking and negotiating with Russia? What's that, Zelensky? Do you have something to hide? I mean, if you do, tell us and we'll be more than happy to negotiate. One thing that I don't think people are willing to do nowadays, even in personal disputes. But that was the thing where I'm like, that's really fucking interesting. That Zelensky signed a decree forbidding the Western world countries from negotiating with Russia. That's like, as I've stated before, what are you trying to hide? And I guess the final point for this whole video is basically saying that, like, how Putin was making a point saying the war could easily be stopped if the Western world countries stop shipping weapons and all that to Ukraine. The war will stop, and then you can sit down and negotiate. It really does surprise me that this man, Putin, is willing to negotiate. He's open to the idea of a negotiation. He's always been open to the idea of a negotiation ever since he got into power in 2000? I'll look it up and I'll put the date that Putin got into power right here. But
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
What's there to work out? It's very simple. I repeat, we have contacts through various agencies. I will tell you what we are saying on this matter and what we are conveying to the US leadership. If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what messages do you get back?
You're going to deliver such and such weapons to Ukraine? Oh, I'm afraid, please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. and they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people, understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
It seems as though he's willing to negotiate and most people are not willing to negotiate. To me, that says a lot of things. It's like, what is the Western world trying to hide? What is Zelensky trying to hide? Well, I mean, we know what Trudeau's trying to hide. He's trying to hide his blackface fucking scandal. God, that fucking cunt seems out of power. Sorry. I just don't really like Trudeau. He's, as I just stated, kind of a bit of a cunt. So my final thoughts on this whole thing is, as I've stated before, if the Kremlin is open to that idea of, I would like to negotiate, I would like to sit down, I would like to have some sort of a debate, figure out what works for Russia, what doesn't work for Russia, what works for Ukraine, what doesn't work for Ukraine, what works for the Western world and NATO, what doesn't work, then why is the Western world and Ukraine not allowing that? If your enemy is willing to negotiate, if your op is willing to negotiate, then maybe being open to that idea of like, hey, okay, they're willing to negotiate with me and bend and ebb and flow a little bit on certain things, maybe I should be open to that idea as well. I certainly know if there's any ops that I have here online, YouTube or Rumble or whatever, if they disagree with me, but they're willing to negotiate with me, I'm open to that idea of negotiations. Man, if the world ran a little bit more like that, we'd have a happier fucking world. But humans are fickle creatures. So yeah, final thoughts. If the Kremlin's willing to negotiate, maybe the West should be open-minded to the idea of a negotiation with Russia. I'm not saying, give them absolute power. I'm not saying, completely, reduce them to nothing in terms of their power and all that. But if they're willing to negotiate, be open to it. Remember, Gen Z, Gen Y, all this shit. Gen Y, Gen Alpha, Gen Z. If your op is willing to negotiate, maybe you should be open to the idea of a negotiation. I'm not saying that both parties that your party's going to walk away happy and these guys are going to not, or vice versa, they're going to walk away happy and you're not. But being able to compromise, being able to come to some sort of a conclusion where, as what a compromise is, both parties walk away happy, that is what we should all be open to. We should all be open to that idea. But unfortunately, it's the world we live in, the economy we live in, not. Anyway, I'm done rambling on about this. It seems like a shorter video than I've usually got into, but to me it seemed pretty straightforward. It seemed very less that I had to talk about, one side or the other. Seems to me pretty straightforward. Anyway, I guess I'll talk to you guys later. See you later.